way that is different from the previous cases, could the concert hall create a public space? Then you have situations like this, where Frank Gehry tries to take the Sharon model and try to extend it. Through those questions, right? Enhance privacy or intimacy, public space through the projects, and develop a scheme like this, right? With a corner relationship to the block, and then a through circulation that makes garden with the theatric or the theater experience. Okay, so he came up with something like this. Right. Something that I think was never done before. Then comes another guy, right? It says, asks another follow-up question. Could the concert hall provide a through public circulation? In other words, the public can go into, otherwise would be the privatized area, back of house area. Could the concert hall increase its flexibility to accommodate multitudes of events? Could the concert hall enhance presence of culture in the city? And there's this guy, extending the previous knowledge. So if you don't know about this project, right, that the ability to kind of combine 3 theaters into one big space or 3 independent spaces. Okay, so synthesis has a methodology too, right? How are you going to how are you going to kind of work at this question? So for some, it's through modeling, right? For others, it's through drawing, through manual methods, through digital methods. But something that is constant is that it takes a iterative process. Right? So you work relentlessly with the aim or objective to say, how am I going to enhance intimacy? How am I going to say up the acoustical performance? And of course, some of which is more technical, others are qualitative, and tend to work well, right, within the qualitative area. But the point is, right, through a method of exploration, addressing this challenge over and over and over again, relentlessly. Right. So there's the concert hall, and then there is the organs. Could the organ be of different material, geometry, and work at it. So I don't want to say too much about this, but Peter has kind of covered this kind of attitude already before. The last kind of category, right, which is very important, has to do with how to judge it. How do you want the critic to judge your work? You have to define that. When you let the critic come up with their own evaluation direction, you're in trouble. Because you have to set that. Unlike the M1 studio, where the teachers set those things for you. For example, Youth 4 has to do with structure. So that becomes the criteria. And you know that that's the main thing that you need to develop, because that counts a lot. That's which your project will be evaluated. A thesis project is not comprehensive. As in, you're going to build that and you address all the issues, from concept, from execute everything. It's not quite that. So be able to determine, right, the evaluation criteria. For example, a project being evaluated by a developer, very different than from an architect, from an engineer. Right? So in the thesis, right, you have to establish those points. Does it have to do with reducing waste factor, allowing wind passability, or is it to do with efficiency for deployment? You know, you're doing a lightweight structure, and then you want people to evaluate it on aesthetics. It could be, but if it's about ease of deployment, you have to demonstrate that this thing is light, it's easy to handle, and so on. You follow up with the same sort of arguments. Multiplicity of programming possibilities, quality of light. Okay, so how to measure, right? How to measure, how to evaluate this work. So this is important so that we can judge the work, right? So you can judge the work. For else, how do you judge it? Okay. You wouldn't even know that you achieved the goals. Right? So we go back to TPAC, which is the OMA project. Right? In terms of evaluation, so the first three, right? Measure its multiplicity and flexibility. Measure its public accessible space. Measure its presence in the city. Wonderful. This is a great thesis because they've done it. Or constructability and cost. So the construction company has went bankrupt. They cannot build this, or it's halfway into construction. So if it's based on 5 and 6, it's a very bad project. 1, 2, 3, good. Right? So be able to set those frameworks for yourself, right? Before the critic is projecting their judgment. Right? You got to do that early on. Right? So the ability to have 3 theaters versus 1 combined theater. The idea of bringing the public access to the project, right? So with the proposition, it then addresses the question, right? The starting point. Right. So with analysis, with synthesis, then you can then go through this final review or midterm review, all the reviews where you can defend, right? Make your arguments, so that you don't just explain what I did this, I did that, I did this, I designed a plan, I told them. You need to then make a point, make an argument out of this process. Okay? Is that clear? Interesting? I have one slide from before, which is called speculation. If you're still waiting, maybe at some point, my analysis is going to tell me which site to pick, which structure system to use, which program to put in my lightweight structure. You're in trouble. You need to just speculate, which is to say, whatever you propose now can still change. But if you just kind of wait and see, big problem. Because you never really know until you try it. You could use 1 week, 2 weeks as a time frame to say, the coming 2 weeks I'm going to do this. If it doesn't work, you do something else. But don't just try to say, there is this solution. If I just wait a little bit, read more books, it's going to come. One example I can share with you is, so we have a student that's a sports person, right? And she has these drawings, very little drawings actually, but ideas. But for her, it would be like, hey, I'm a sports person, but let me think about practice. I think about jumping over that. Right, let me think more. Never actually tried to jump. There's a reason why practice is called practice, because you have to practice. You have to make. And not everything you make will like one line, lead you to the final product. But if you don't speculate, if you don't kind of just leap, big problem, especially given that there's 2 months of time. I mean, a semester of time. That is kind of there. It's very easy to be complacent and just kind of wait because, wow, I have 5 months. What's there to rush? So this is important quote in that he says, don't just accumulate. Don't accumulate data, research, findings, math. You gotta put yourself out there with a project, right? With a proposal, and say, how would it be if I do this? Is that okay? Yeah. So let's see. This is 40 minutes, so I can go on a little bit more. Maybe I show some student works. The masters is too far away from me. Analysis, right? Student examples. Sometimes analysis is just mappings. You just draw. You just draw relentlessly, looking at the urbanizations of your site, right? Through mappings. You just draw, right? Of course, you need to frame it. And so in this case, delimiting an area so that you can study it. You cannot study London with a particular kind of focus. You can only look at a site with delimitation. You gotta limit, right? Your interest, let's say, right? In order to find out something new. So sometimes it is just to say you're going to map, you're going to look at public space, you're going to look at the program, say, distribution, and these are all maps that you know how to do. Sometimes you map and then you say you sort and categorize, right? The land use conditions, right? And you learn that actually there are a lot of kind of undedicated space, but they're not public space. They're just kind of really poor, inefficient space, residual space that's left over. So the chart on the left starts to sort the space outside of their kind of physical environment. And there's actually quite a lot of public or undesignated spaces. So then it becomes maybe an opportunity to do something about it. And sometimes it's just being relentless. Right? You're working on a housing typology, you just draw the housing typology. All the housing typology. You don't just pick one or two and then call it a day. You don't, if interview is what you are seriously interested in, you cannot just interview 2 guys and say, the people in Kennedy Town wants this. Because I interviewed 2 guys. They say public space should have a coffee machine. For interviews or these mappings to work, it has to be done extensively, right? You have to exhaust, you almost have to turn into a kind of machine lighted mind. So looking at central, but particular areas of central, and you go there, you define an area, you follow the same methods, right? How the found condition, and how the Filipino helpers use devices to make it a temporary shelter. Same method to look at conditions. Repeat, and repeat, like practice. Like playing the piano. Sometimes drawing. Again, not to draw comprehensive, just to draw things that supports, right, your kind of hunch. So looking at these collective spaces that kindergarten kids from upper years and lower years can mingle. That was part of the pedagogy of this particular kindergarten way of teaching, and the hypothesis, right? This student's hypothesis was that architecture can enhance pedagogy. That this space, if we're having this conversation in a park, a garden, it will enhance your understanding. That's kind of her hypothesis. So, series of cases trying to support that hunch. The flexibility of certain spaces to accommodate different activities. The use of this little geometries to provide a kind of privacy at the entrance. So not drawing everything, but drawing the specific kind of point of view of the case. There's, you get the kind of what I'm trying to go, where I'm trying to go. I don't need to go into the specifics, but the point is, you take one thing and then you go crazy with it. You really try to find out how it works. Sometimes people develop analysis that might not be through conventions as we know it. Sometimes you find ways to map less conventional. So there was an interest in learning about the relationship between sound and environment, or sound and space. Right? So I've showed this before. Recording a number of sounds from the city to the suburbs, right? And then take that sound, trying to look into the sound for possibilities. So through some software, a few steps, sound waves were converted into these notation systems that she was able to kind of convert into a musical chart, and then play a piece of kind of music or sound out of that. So the noise that went through a graphic representation was then converted into a musical chart, and then playing that musical chart, which is what you're listening to. Sometimes these things don't necessarily lead you to a architectural project, but through the process, the conclusion drawn was that space is or say sound in a way is a byproduct of the space. So whatever the space, the events that's associated with the space generates, right? Sound. So these two things are interdependent, therefore forming some kind of position for the work. You probably know Rina, but there's sometimes the work could be more directly, right? Through convention that's not like taught in school, or something that you might have to kind of invent a bit. Synthesis. You're going to be very bored because I'm showing you really the same thing, which is to say, I have a project, I have this idea that these still houses in Taiyo could be better. There's one element, which is the core, that remains intact, but I'm trying out various options of how the core could support living space, a sleeping area, and so on. And then do these projects and studies relentlessly, of course, by evaluating it too. It's not just to make, synthesize, and then go back to analyzing. So instead of analyzing the city or the topic, you then analyze your work. Does it work? Does it work better? Version A better, version B better. Chris Hwang, right? So this guy was interested in working in designing a kind of reclaim the swimming experience across the harbor. Right? So there's a moment where the artificial or the man-made swimming pool merges with the harbor. Okay, trying scenarios, options, and then evaluate. Right? The water level experience is just from last year, Thomas. Right? looking at relationship between rhythm and space, and just be stubborn. You do many versions, iterative versions. If you want to just design one time in March, you're not going to have a good project. You won't have a good project. You need to design much sooner. Okay? Stubborn. Go, and then, of course, at some point, right? For this one, it's more, there's an idea of space, ideal space, before it's contaminated or shaped and formed by the site. In terms of evaluation, again, how do you want to be judged? I am not trying to say, everybody should make physical models. Do what you know. Right? Work with software if you're a software kind of person, but evaluate it through the same kind of frame of reference. Again, is it about the kind of sustainability of the work, and you use more quantifiable measures to judge this work? Or is it about part-to-whole relationship, easy of assembly, and so on? Or spatial experience, qualitative enhancement? Okay? Let's see. I have one more, which is, I think, kind of interesting. Provisional. So this is one example where sometimes your hypothesis need to be revised because your research led you to a direction where it's not quite what you wanted, where you wanted to go. So this is a mental asylum. So just a series of studies, case studies of mental asylums, and looking at the space, how's the space, how the organization of the space relates to the program. Right? The long corridors as a way to control, manage, right? And putting these mental patients in little cells. Right? That's a model, that's a paradigm, right? Maybe traced to way back, let's say. And as the kind of stigma for mental asylum starts to be lessened, right? It's no longer individual cells. Maybe it is actually better, right, to group people with issues in a community setting. Right? So the typology, the building typology evolved with medicine, right? With kind of perception of the disease. It went from a disease that you cannot even see. It's closer, say, to a criminal, right? That you lock up, to someone that needs help. There's the Fujimoto model, right, of being even more kind of free, right? Allowing, this is a children's psychiatric hospital, allowing the children to find hiding places and so on. So this is the paradigm 3, paradigm 1, 2, 3. So if you follow that, right, logic, you would say, what's the paradigm 4? Architectural paradigm. Right? I want to find out what that is. So I just, by chance, have 2 students that work on this topic. Right? So the first student came up with the 4th paradigm, which is to say, let's mix all 3 together. Right? The ones with severe mental disorder, that with tendency to be violent, they need to have the individual cells, and then depending on the severity, essentially all 3 paradigms in one architecture. Right? But what this student did is then realizing that, well, actually the architecture, right, of the asylum is questionable, right, in that a lot of the services are being placed, right, into health workers going to, right, these mentally kind of troubled people, as opposed to mentally troubled people going to a piece of architecture. So then it's the kuntang, kuntong